Welcome to Finding Faith in Fandoms, where Christian artists explore the spiritual themes and biblical parallels of our favorite stories. I'm your host, Jacqueline Tetrault, and I'm joined today by my partner in crime, Amelia Smith.
Love that introduction. Thank you. I'm always honored to be your partner in crime.
You're very welcome. We are recording this episode in the summer, so I thought it would be a good time to cover a story that famously takes place in the first week of August. The book, movie, and musical, Tuck Everlasting. Please note that this episode will contain spoilers. Tuck Everlasting was first a novel written by Natalie Babbitt that was published in 1975, and since then it's been adapted to a movie in 2002 and a Broadway musical in mid-2010s. So I thought we could start by talking about how we came to know the story. Amelia, I think you were familiar with it before I was, so can you tell me how you got to know it?
I came across the musical, I think just through social media, like it popped up in Facebook ads, and I was like, that looks cute. It's got Andrew Keenan Bolger in it, who I already loved from the Broadway version of Newsies. He plays Crutchy and is just adorable. And he was like in his mid-30s at the time, but if you need someone to play a teenager, especially a teenager who doesn't ever age, it's Andrew Keenan Bolger. And so I was like, all right, what is this? This looks cute. And then listened to the musical soundtrack, fell in love because it is gorgeous, and then found a copy of the book. I'd never read it when I was younger, but I wish I had. If I ever have children in my life, I can't wait to share it with them because it is a delightful coming-of-age story. Mm-hmm. And I think I shared both of those with you because as soon as I listened to the musical, I was like, Jackie, this is something Jackie would absolutely love.
You were right. I think my sister had told me about when she read the book, maybe in school, but I never read it or saw any version of it. But I heard you mention it a couple times. You mentioned one particular sequence in the musical that sounded very interesting. And so we had a copy at my house, and I actually brought it with me on summer vacation 2 years ago. My family loves to visit Point Sebago, which is this little lakeshore resort in Maine. And it's short, but it was like the perfect book for the summertime to bring when you're somewhere out in nature, and I absolutely loved it. And then I loved the musical soundtrack when I listened to it. I was listening to it on repeat for weeks. And then I think it was just a few months later that you ended up trying out for a production of it, right?
Yeah. So the show only had a very short run on Broadway, I think because the main character is a very young girl and they had a very young actress playing the role. So because she was young, she couldn't really commit to doing a long run. So they just did a short limited, I think it was only like 2 weeks or might have been a full month, but it was very short.
Which is so unfair because she was so talented. Sarah Charles Lewis.
Yes.
Her voice is amazing.
Yes.
She's so talented at such a young age.
And it's continued. I think she has continued her education, and she's continued to get some pretty good roles in regional theater and is a very promising young actor. And I think she's now focusing more on dance, but definitely keep an eye out for Sarah Charles Lewis. She's an incredibly talented young woman, and this was such a great start to her professional career. So because it had such a short Broadway run, the rights became available for community theaters pretty early on, but not a lot of places were picking it up. And then we found out that this theater near us was doing it, and I auditioned because you can't pass up on a chance to be in a show that is so good and that no one else is doing.
I remember talking with you about it afterwards and saying the book feels almost like the textual equivalent of a Hayao Miyazaki film. The way that Natalie Babbitt describes nature, it feels like she's doing with prose what Miyazaki and his studio do with visual art, with the natural world and the themes that it conveys about life and death and the cycle of things. Yeah, it's absolutely beautiful.
excellent comfort reading. The book has just such a soothing, relaxing tone to it, even though there are some pretty dramatic things that happen toward the end.
And some very heavy topics.
Yeah.
Like, it's like a 10-year-old's introduction to these existential questions about life and coming to think about your lifespan and what it means to be alive and the purpose of life. Those are big things for a 10-year-old to start thinking about, but that's kind of the process of growing up. You start to grapple with those bigger ideas.
Yeah. And I think it's done in such a gentle way that I feel like it is actually a very good introduction for kids that age to these ideas of what does it mean to grow older? What does it mean to live or to die? The fact that our life is finite, and what do we do with that? That's, big things to be thinking about at that age, like you said, but this is a sort of safe and gentle way to introduce that subject. And it's just such a beautiful read. It's just the rich narration and I think because the focus of the book is on the beauty and value of an ordinary life, there are moments where the narration just kind of zooms in on these little ordinary details and describes them in such a way that they feel beautiful. That's why it reminds me of a Miyazaki film, because he'll take time to be like, let's focus on this raindrop falling off of a leaf, or this little background thing, or like, let's zoom around the artistic clutter of this charming little cabin in the woods.
Yes.
So, next adaptation of it should obviously be anime.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. I do want to acknowledge up front, the book is a fairly secular approach to the topics of life and death, and I actually came across some criticism of it from Christians, like saying that it's blasphemous because it rejects the concept of eternal life. I can see that, but I think that misses the point of the story. It really doesn't touch on what happens to us after we die. It's more about coming to terms with the fact that death is a reality in this present world. It also is a bit of a thought experiment. At one point, the characters actually talk through that. Well, what if there was no death? People kept being born and no one died. We live in a finite world.
Eternal life in this world is not what we're promised.
Yeah. Eternal life in a fallen world would... A curse sounds like too strong language. I mean,
That's what the Tucks call it.
Yeah. May Tuck says she doesn't know if it's a blessing or a curse. It's not the situation that God intended in the garden. I think Jesse actually says one theory they have is that the spring that gives them immortality is something left over from an old plan or an original plan for how the world was supposed to be. We'll get a little more into how it ties in with certain passages of the Bible, but my takeaway is it's not about rejecting eternal life. It's about recognizing how precious life is with all of its changes and even with loss and death. Those things are, in a sense, necessary for living a full life. I think it is a good starting point. It's not an end point for dealing with those things, but it is a starting point. And it's an age-appropriate one for when you're a young child. And it's something you continue to come to terms with. It doesn't get into more complicated questions like, why do good people sometimes die young? And those are things that you have to sort of grapple with more in the realm of philosophy and theology. The story itself, as a coming of age, is lovely. So the main character is this little girl, Winnie Foster. And it's basically about her meeting this family, the Tucks, and how they impact her. And in some versions, it's also about how she impacts them. We've mentioned it's a coming of age as Winnie learns about the way different people live and comes to a new maturity by the end. And then she lives her life differently as a result of meeting the Tucks. Although it feels very grounded in reality, it also fits the format of a fairy tale or fantasy story because Winnie leaves the ordinary world and enters into a more fantastical world. And that visit allows her to return and the veil is pulled back on the way she looks at her life. She's able to see the extraordinary in it. Some versions play a little bit with fairy tale motifs. Like in the musical, they add the element of Winnie wanting to go to a fair, like Cinderella wanting to go to the festival. There's a toad who is like Winnie's recurring sidekick, sort of. I also personally think that Winnie's journey also is like the heroine's journey. It varies a little bit between the versions, but basically Winnie is in a phase of wanting to reject her family's ideas and social structure and the concept of femininity that her family expects her to fit. She enters the world of the Tucks, and 3 out of the 4 Tuck family members are men, and she sort of identifies herself more with them, but then she comes back to her family and learns to sort of assimilate the different aspects of herself. The location of the story is this village and wood called Tree Gap, but Tree Gap's location is left ambiguous, at least in the book. In the musical, they say that it's somewhere in New Hampshire, but I think that was mainly just so they could rhyme it with the word forever.
I totally didn't realize that. You're so right.
The time in which it takes place also varies. In the book, the year is 1880. In the movie, it's 1914. And in the musical, it's in 1893. But the important thing is it's the end of the 19th century or start of the 20th century. And it has the feeling of being somewhere in America that still has a bit of the feeling of a frontier. And part of the reason I love the musical is because I think it evokes that so well with the music, the instrumentation. You get the feeling like, yes, there are still woods and mountains, big open spaces. It just has a very Americana feeling about it. The movie was actually filmed in Maryland, but some parts of it looked like it could have been in Louisiana, the bayou, but then it also has feeling like a small Midwestern town where there's not a lot of law enforcement. So yeah, it's sort of flexible, I guess, in where and when it takes place. So basically, Winnie is a young girl. She's 10 in the book. They age her up in the movie to be 15. And her family owns this wood, and she actually runs away to explore the woods by herself. And of course, in fairy tales, that's a place of transformation. When a young heroine goes into the woods, something magical is probably going to happen there. And she does encounter someone. She meets this seemingly 17-year-old boy, Jesse Tuck, and she sees him drinking from a spring underneath this tree. And then she wants to take a drink as well, but he tells her no, she can't. And then that day happens to be when Jesse and his older brother Miles and their parents are supposed to have their 10-year reunion. So his mother and brother show up, and they see that, oh no, she's found the spring, she saw us drinking from it, and now she wants some. Then they're like, okay, we need to explain some things to you.
So they kidnap her, logically.
Yes, pretty much. I like how the book describes what Winnie is thinking and feeling at that point, because she's always wanted an adventure, and she's imagined scenarios where she was kidnapped, but she never imagined that would be by people who are so nice and seem fairly ordinary. So she has very mixed emotions about everything happening. But the Tucks take her to their home. They have a cabin by this pond or lake, a really picturesque little area. And they bring her there just to explain to her their story and why she has to not drink the water and keep them a secret. So they reveal to her that they drank from that spring nearly 100 years before and unknowingly became immortal because of it. They have not aged at all since then. So like Jesse was 17, Miles was 22. Their parents are maybe in their 40s or middle-aged. And for years, they just lived ordinary lives, but they didn't change at all. And then some of them had accidents, but didn't die. They also had a cat and a horse, and it changes between the versions. But one of them drank from the water, the other didn't. And the immortal one survived accidentally being shot and all kinds of things. So eventually they figured out that the spring was the cause of it. But they've decided to keep it a secret because if people knew about the spring, they would all want to drink the water. They would all want to stay young and immortal, but that would actually be disastrous. And we come to learn more about their reasons why it turned out to be a bad thing instead of a good thing for them.
Well, one of those reasons is already hunting them down.
Yes. The antagonist of the story is the man in the yellow suit.
I always want to call him the man in the yellow hat.
I know, right?
He does not have a cute little monkey. He's not that man.
Maybe he has a monkey in the carnival when he works for them.
But maybe, but
he is not a nice man. He is more like a snake oil salesman.
Or an evil banana.
Yes.
To quote Winnie's grandmother.
Yes. One of the best lines ever spoken on a stage. So this nameless man in an ostentatiously yellow suit has been looking for the Tucks because he heard rumors or stories about them from his grandmother, who had a connection with some of them. So he wants to find the spring. So all these characters just happen to converge on this day in the first week of August. Winnie ends up spending time with the Tucks, probably just 2 days or so. In the movie, it's a montage, and it looks like it could be longer, a few days maybe. But then also, because Winnie went missing, and her parents don't know what happened to her, they also have the constable and law enforcement looking for her. The details of exactly how things go down vary, but basically, the man in the yellow suit tracks Winnie down, and then he tries to make a deal with her family because he wants the woods. So he says that he will bring Winnie back for them if they give him the woods, because he finds out, oh, the spring is there. Then he approaches the Tucks, basically with a business venture, saying, hey, you can help me sell this water. We can make a fortune, give it to people who can afford it and supposedly deserve it. He's very insulting to them because they're just like simple people, not particularly well educated. He just has a completely warped perception of human life and human worth. When the Tucks refuse and express their concern and their outrage about this plan, the man in the yellow suit tries to take Winnie away or hold her hostage, depending on the version. And that is when May Tuck, so the mother of this family, strikes him. They have a rifle, but she doesn't shoot him. She uses the butt of the rifle to hit him on the head, which ends up killing him.
Don't know if that was her intention exactly. I think she just has become very maternal towards Winnie at that point.
Yes.
They all, I mean, the Tucks have pretty much adopted Winnie on sight as one of their own, and they feel very protective toward her. So I think she's just thinking, I've got to get this evil banana away from our child.
Yeah, no. May is very much a mama bear. And yes, she defends Winnie. Unfortunately, that's right as the constable arrives. I just thought of this yesterday. It probably wasn't intentional, but the fact that it was the mother who struck the enemy on his head just made me think, oh wait, that's like the prophecy of Eve and her children. That is like Judith and Jael and Mary crushing the serpent's head. I think that's kind of awesome, even if it wasn't intentional. Then Winnie actually has to help the Tucks because they realize if May is hanged as a murderer, she won't die. And so their secret will be revealed. In the book, May is arrested and in jail, but Winnie trades places with her so that she can escape and she can buy them time. In the musical, Winnie actually takes the blame for the death of the man. Either way, there's a kind of substitutionary element there. The Tucks do have to leave, but Winnie then is faced with a choice. Backtracking a little bit, Jesse suggested to Winnie that maybe someday, when she is closer to his age, because she's only 10 in the book, once she is 17, same age as him, maybe she could drink the water and she could join their family, and maybe the two of them could even get married one day. The musical goes more into detail about how questionable this idea is. The movie just sort of erased the age difference. They made Winnie 15 and he's 17. And they made the romantic element explicit there. I think it's more like they do strike up a friendship very quickly. Winnie does have a crush on him in the book. That's pretty clear. But I think there's kind of an element of, whoa, we finally have someone on the outside who knows about us. This is someone who could share this weird life with us. So then Winnie has to decide afterwards whether to drink from the spring or not.
They give her a bottle of the water as a parting gift. Sort of leave her with this decision to wrestle with.
And I should have mentioned before, Winnie has conversations with each of the Tucks. The parents are Angus and May, and Miles has his whole backstory. He was actually married and had at least one child, maybe two. And his family actually left him when they realized that he wasn't aging. They thought that he had sold his soul to the devil or dabbled in magic or something. So he is still carrying that grief and knows that it's isolating to be stuck at your age while the world keeps moving around you. Angus has this conversation with Winnie. He has a lovely father figure, maybe one of the best in fiction, but he explains to her the cycle of life and how the Tucks are not part of that cycle anymore. They are like a stone in a river and everything's passing them by. So Winnie is left to wrestle with this. The story actually ends with an epilogue where either Angus and May or Jesse or the whole Tuck family come back to Tree Gap decades later and find that Winnie decided to grow up, live a normal life, and then died of old age. That's the story of the Tucks. The end. This may sound like a weird comparison, but I think Tuck Everlasting seems like a more mature version of Peter Pan or a more child-friendly version of Twilight.
I have heard the comparison between Tuck Everlasting and Twilight before, and I actually wondered, because Tuck Everlasting was written in the 70s, I wonder if that inspired Stephanie Meyer at all. I haven't read Twilight, I know you have, but it does deal with some very similar themes. And this relationship between someone who's mortal and this immortal family, how do we make that work? And I actually had read, I think somewhere when I was a kid, there was concern in some Christian communities about the Twilight books because vampires. And somebody had actually suggested Tuck Everlasting as an alternative because it deals with similar themes, but not vampires.
Yes.
I think the Peter Pan comparison is interesting because, yes, it does deal with the same theme of the appeal of staying young forever, never growing up. I do see a lot of similarities between Winnie and Jessie and Peter Pan and Wendy. Like this dashing, fun young boy who takes this young girl out of her stuffy, prim Victorian life and takes her off on an adventure. But then she ultimately decides, yes, that's fun, but I have this whole life ahead of me and all these things that I haven't experienced yet, and I want that.
Yeah. Jesse definitely is the most adventurous member of his family. He is still a teenager, basically, and so he's still seeking thrills, probably more so now that he knows he's immortal. He loves fooling around, he travels to different places, and then he encourages Winnie to go outside of her comfort zone, like climbing trees or climbing a small mountain in the movie. So I can definitely see similarities between Jesse and Peter Pan. But then they also realize that they are missing out on the experiences of family life and growing up because of their situation.
Peter Pan, I think the book came out in early 1900s, and I do have a headcanon of Winnie reading it to her children as an adult and thinking of her own immortal boy who's still out there somewhere.
And it raises questions about what is the purpose of life. And Miles talks a little about that in the book when he's with Winnie, and how Jesse is a little bit hedonistic in the sense that he's looking for a good time. I think if he were a little older, it could have gone into some darker paths. Miles, even though he's not particularly smart or educated or skilled, he wants to do something important and something for others. He thinks it's important not to just live for yourself, but to live to make other people's lives better.
Which is a very Christian idea.
Yeah.
The idea that we're given this time to make the world a better place and to try to help others. And that, I think, is a good perspective to have, because oftentimes when we're living our day-to-day lives, which seems to be kind of what the Tucks are doing, at least May and Angus are just like, you know, they're making their little crafts that they sell where they can, and they're growing food and just doing household things. It's so easy to get caught up in just trying to survive, just trying to get by from day to day, that we lose sight of the bigger picture of why are we here? What is our purpose here? And I love that Miles has lived long enough and doesn't really have to worry as much about survival because he can't die. And has that perspective of what I've been given is a gift, even if I don't always feel like it is. And I have a responsibility to share that gift with others by doing something to help people.
That actually reminds me, there is a character sort of like that in Twilight. The father figure of the Cullen family. His name is Carlisle, and he's actually a doctor. He has an interesting backstory. He came from a Christian background, actually.
Oh, really?
So, yeah, his father was a minister who hunted vampires and witches. Carlisle, he eventually realized, oh, now I have all this time available to me, and I don't have to worry about money or anything for survival. So he dedicated himself to studying and almost like trying to atone for what he is as a vampire. He uses his abilities to save lives and leads other people, other vampires, to live moral lives as well. I hadn't thought of that until now. Probably the most interesting thing is how each of the members of the Tuck family has responded differently to their situation. And I think this comes through most in the musical, which really explores each of them a lot more and kind of extends their emotional arcs. We see Winnie interact with each of them. They're just delighted to have another person know their story and welcome someone new into their world for the first time. And Winnie is struck by just the fact that they live at such a slower pace. They aren't worried about keeping up appearances the way her parents do. Also, like Miyazaki, just taking the time to notice and experience things. I will say, in the musical, they're all a little bit more angsty about their situation. Looking at the Salvation story pattern, both the Fosters, Winnie's family, and the Tucks have this element of broken relationships. For the Tucks, even though there's 4 of them, they're all kind of isolated in the loneliness of their situation. In the musical, May doesn't always feel like Angus appreciates her. He just kind of sleeps all day in that version. Miles and Jessie sort of just wander around. Meanwhile, Winnie, she's in a bit of a rebellious stage. And in the musical, they added this element that actually her father had recently passed away. And I think that makes sense because it adds a lot more weight to her discovery that immortality is possible. She's had to recently face death and now has to face this decision. Do I want to die and let my family die, or can I also take part in this?
I think she does discuss, could she make her mother and her grandmother immortal with her, and could they all just kind of live forever? And that's sort of what spurs Angus to have this conversation with her about, well, May is actually the one who spurs him to have the talk with her. But, that's what kind of makes the Tuck parents realize, okay, we need to have this conversation with her about how this is not all it seems to be. There is beauty in the life that you've been given, and there's value in the life that you've been given and in living it.
It's cool how the musical gives each of the Tucks a special song that they sing when Winnie is spending time with them. So May sings a song called Your Most Beautiful Day.
I absolutely love this song. May and Winnie at that point are in the attic of the Tuck home. they're looking for clothes for Winnie to change into since she's spending the night with them, and what she ends up settling on is a boy's outfit. But they pull out this beautiful dress that May wore when she was much younger, and she tries it on to see if it still fits, and then she starts reminiscing about how she met Angus and how he proposed to her. And she tells Winnie this whole story, which starts coming to life around them as she tells it. And it's really a beautiful song about not only the joy of being young and falling in love, but the joy of looking back on that as an older person. The beautiful refrain that May keeps repeating is, looking back is something to look forward to. And, like, I have to remind myself of that as I'm getting older. It can be very hard, especially in the theater world and in an area like the one we live in, where there are a lot of colleges and a lot of high schools with very good theater programs, and the community theater scene is, like, dominated by all these young actors. And yeah, it's been a little bit of a mental adjustment to be like, okay, I'm no longer a young woman. What am I right now? And what is my life going to look like going forward? And it's encouraging to remind myself that looking back is something to look forward to, and gaining the perspective that you gain with years and with age is part of life, and it's something to value. It's something to be proud of. So I found that song personally very encouraging. It's also just a gorgeous song. And a very sweet bonding moment for Winnie and May as well, because you kind of get the sense that Winnie's mother has been, at least in the musical, too deep in her grief to really do much reminiscing and sharing with Winnie about those sort of coming-of-age things.
Yeah. I have mixed feelings about the song just because it seems much slower than the rest of the musical and kind of slows down the pace. But yeah, I love the themes, and I can definitely relate to the looking forward to looking back. I feel like I've done that for most of my life. What I find ironic about that moment is May is trying on this beautiful, very feminine dress and remembering her romance at the very moment when Winnie is changing into boys' clothes. So it's almost like they're going in different directions.
Yeah. You look at May as a whole character, and at least in the book, May Tuck is a physically and emotionally strong, hardworking woman. She raised 2 boys, and she's basically a frontier woman. She's got this strength and grit to her. And it's neat to see how she has learned to balance both. And we kind of get the sense by the end of the book that Winnie has also learned to balance both sides of herself.
Yeah.
Like, you don't have to limit yourself as a woman to one sphere or the other. Like, she grows up in the musical. We see her courting and getting married, and we learn by the end of the book from her tombstone that she did get married and have a family. Very traditionally feminine things, but also her grave, I don't know if it's in the book, but in the musical, her grave also proudly proclaims that she was an expert fisherman, which is a skill she learned from Angus. So I think it's kind of implied that she, as she grew up, learned to balance both aspects of her, all the different interests and the different forms of expression that are part of who she is. And actually, if I ever get a chance to direct this show, that would be something very fun to play with for that montage at the end, showing like, maybe we show her with, like, suffragette colors at one point, or, like, wearing pants in the 50s as a grandmother or a grown-up. I don't know. Because Winnie lives through a very interesting period in history, and a period of a lot of change for women. Many, actually. She lives through a bunch of very significant world events.
Yeah.
So I think as a woman living through all of those periods of time and all those moments in history would need to draw on both the strength of femininity and the strength that she learns from the more traditionally masculine side as well.
Yeah. Winnie actually has her bonding sort of moment with Jessie. Well, she has two, actually. When they first meet, he teaches her how to climb a tree, and they have a very energetic song called Top of the World. Very fun, and he's showing her how to look at things with a fresh perspective. Then later, they go out to the fair together, and they sing the song Partner in Crime, because Jessie's explaining, yeah, I have to basically travel solo everywhere to keep a low profile. And Winnie's like, you need a partner in crime. You need someone to be with you, because why see the world in all of its glories without someone to tell your stories to? And I think that does hit on a very important point. The meaning of life comes through relationships. And that's something that the Tucks learn, I think, over the course of the musical, at least, that they still need each other and they need to work at their relationships with each other, because they're kind of all that they've got. Then later, Miles tells Winnie the story of him and his family. His song is called Time. And then Angus has this beautiful, beautiful song called The Wheel. The lyrics are drawn almost exactly from a scene in the book where he takes her rowing on the lake, and they're observing all the wildlife around them, the trees and the birds and frogs and fish, and just realizing everything moves in a cycle. And the Tucks are kind of stuck on that wheel. They aren't able to move. I think Winnie brings out the parental side of May and Angus more than they've experienced for a long time. The boys don't really need them as parents anymore, and having an actual growing child in their care brings out a softer side of them. Actually, I think of Miles too. There are moments in the musical. Miles is a dad too, and you can see it come through, and he's like, don't confuse her, and he wants what's best for Winnie. In the story of the Tucks, when they're trying to explain their backstory to her, I picture him getting down on one knee to explain, like, all right, here's the deal. Winnie helps all of them to see things differently. And the musical has such a bittersweet ending for Jessie. So this was the point that you had mentioned a couple times, that the musical actually has this ballet sequence at the end. So no dialogue, and it's like a montage of the rest of Winnie's life. So you see her go from a young girl to a young woman, and then to an old woman. You see her interacting with her family. You see her courting this other character, actually. The musical added Hugo, who is the son of the constable, and actually helps track down Winnie. He's a sweet character in his own right. But anyway, we see Jessie comes back for Winnie like he told her he would, while she is courting Hugo. And so Jessie sees, oh, she's probably 17 by that point, so that would have been the ideal age for her to drink the water and become immortal and basically run away with him. But Jessie sees her and sees that she has this path with Hugo, and so he leaves. He doesn't announce himself to her or anything. He realizes if he really cares about her, then he has to let her go, let her live her life in all its fullness, rather than keep her all to himself, basically.
Which is a really great moment of character growth for him. And you actually wrote quite a lovely story about that, sort of an epilogue to the epilogue, showing that Jesse has matured. He's able to think about someone else's needs and someone else's perspective and put her interests before his own. So he just sort of quietly disappears and lets Winnie go and live the rest of her life, and then comes back decades later with his family to pay his respects. I love that sequence. The musical calls it the story of Winnie Foster, where we just get to see her entire life enacted in ballet form and see how many relationships she gets to experience, how many joys and tough things as well. I mean, she has to deal with the loss of her grandmother and her mother and eventually her husband, but she also gets to experience being married and having a family and growing up and the joys of each stage of life. There's a beautiful moment. I imagine it varies greatly from production to production, but at least in the production I was in, at the end of that sequence, they had Winnie as an elderly woman face to face with her 11-year-old self that she was at the start of the story. And they just kind of look into each other's eyes. And it's kind of like what May was talking about earlier, looking back is something to look forward to, where she's able to look back at the girl that she was then and sort of see the person that she's become and take pride in that journey.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's beautiful. That sequence of Winnie's life kind of underscores the idea that you find meaning and joy in life through relationships with other people, because we see her in all these different roles. First daughter and granddaughter, then wife, mother, like the Wheel lyrics say.
Mm-hmm.
She has her own solo song called Everlasting. What she's realized is that a life is the greatest wonder on earth. And meanwhile, her impact on the Tucks is that they are no longer just sitting around and wondering why this happened to them and feeling sorry for themselves. They're going to try to make the most of the cards that they've been dealt, even though it's not what they wanted. They're still going to work at their relationships and do something with all the time that they've been given.
And in a sense, I think the ending is bittersweet because Winnie is no longer with them and they only get to know her for a very brief moment in time, and then when they come back to Tree Gap, she's gone. But the fact that the time she spent with them taught her the value of the life that she gets to live and inspired her to live it to the fullest and enjoy every stage, every adventure that life had in store for her. And in a way, that is their legacy. So they have had some impact on her life and all the other lives that touched hers or were formed by hers. Mm-hmm. So in a way, they are continuing to have an impact on the world and already making a positive change just even by in their weird situation.
Yeah. It makes me think of the Emily Dickinson poem, "If I can stop one heart from breaking, I shall not live in vain." Winnie was just one little girl that they met, and they knew her for a day or two, but they changed her life, and that in turn changed many others. So yeah, it's really beautiful how they influence each other. We won't talk much about the movie, other than that I just watched it for the first time recently, and my assessment is it was visually very beautiful and well cast. The script was I've studied screenwriting, and I was picking out all these weak spots and like, yeah, no, this is too cliche, or this is not very well written. I'd say it was enjoyable overall, though. And it has, instead of Winnie's father dying, toward the end, her grandmother dies. So that was an interesting moment. And you do see some healing of her relationships with her parents, because that was a bigger conflict. And at the end, they actually leave Tree Gap to see the world together.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's a big change.
Yeah. In the book and musical, it's more implied when he stayed in the same town the rest of her life. But no, it's nice to think that she did get out and explore the way she wanted to with Jesse.
Yeah.
But then she gets to do it with the family that she has rather than the family she wishes that she had. And her parents learn to accept her more for who she is and accept that she's growing up and that she's her own person.
That's also a nice ending.
Yeah. Taking this back to the premise of this podcast is, how do our favorite stories tie in with the Bible and spirituality? So I have sort of scattered thoughts about this. The idea of the spring and this water that gives life. First off, in Genesis, there's the tree of life in the Garden of Eden, which Adam and Eve actually aren't meant to taste the fruit of.
I think the spring is probably taking inspiration from, there are two trees mentioned in the book of Genesis. There's the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and then there's the tree of life. And neither of them are things that Adam and Eve are supposed to grab and take for themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And yet they're things that they're kind of drawn to one way or another, and the serpent ends up tempting them with promises and making them feel like something that is being kept from them if they don't take it. Mm-hmm. It ends up having irreversible consequences and causing suffering, which is what the spring does with the Tucks. I mean, mm-hmm. unknowingly, they take this thing that completely alters their lives and does end up causing a lot of suffering, particularly for Miles. The man in the yellow suit, yes. I think, is acting very much like the serpent when it comes to the spring. He wants to offer this thing to the world that they're not supposed to have.
Yes, he's totally the serpent, greedy and conniving. He sees life basically as something to sell or something to steal, if necessary, rather than a gift, which is how Winnie comes to see it. Like, life is a gift for us to receive, not for us to grasp at and take for ourselves. It would have seemed like making a deal with the devil. He wants to basically have a traveling show and make people pay a fortune for immortality, but then it would backfire. It would be like a curse to them instead.
Yeah.
And could cause a lot of chaos, like if people tried to go to war over that territory or the water. It would just be horrible.
And that's exactly what happens when Adam and Eve take the serpent's offer and take something. They seize the fruit rather than waiting for God to give them what God has for them, whatever God has planned. Of course, the promises fall flat and ends up having disastrous consequences that, of course, the serpent doesn't mention anything about, because what salesman is going to go into detail about the side effects or potential downfall of whatever they're marketing. But I do think there's some strong parallels there of him taking and selling something that sounds so good, but ends up going so bad, and ends up being a barrier to
relationship.
Yeah, well, when we're tempted to take what we want instead of accepting what God is giving us or offering to us, we miss out on the chance of what God's offering. Mm-hmm. Like the Tucks, I mean, even though the book isn't coming from a particularly Christian perspective, they don't really talk about religion or their beliefs at all, but on the one hand, they're missing out on eternal life with God in the world beyond this one. If, say, the man with the yellow suit succeeded and was selling eternal life to people on this earth, it means we miss out on eternal life in heaven. And even not thinking about that, you look at what happens to the Tucks, they miss out on relationship because they have to hide from people so that no one discovers their secret, which is another parallel to when Adam and Eve take the fruit from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. The first thing they do is to hide.
Yes.
And they feel like they have to go into hiding, and it turns into this whole cycle of human beings feeling like we have to hide from God and from one another, the things that we're ashamed of, the things that we feel like we can't present to people, our vulnerabilities. And so the Tucks are cut off from relationship, they're cut off from the different experiences of growing and aging, especially the younger members of the family miss out on so many experiences of life. It is, I think, very much a parallel in that way, and could be a good way to talk about with kids or with younger readers or audience members. What would happen if Winnie drank the water, or if the man in the yellow suit sold it? What would it be like if we were living just our lives here forever? How is that different from the life that God offers us? And wouldn't it be sad to accept something less than the full life that God offers us here and eternity with him.
Yes. It makes me think of the concept of abundant life.
Yes.
Jesus says, I came that they may have life and have it in abundance.
Yes.
We are made for life, but not just this life. We're made for something more. And that life will be eternal, and that will be a good thing. There won't be the same dynamics of suffering and loss. So at first, I didn't think that the story had much of a Christ figure in it. But looking at the book again, I realized actually Winnie does gain some kind of Christ-like qualities by the end. So first off, she takes May's place in prison. So she's sort of acting as the scapegoat. Even though she doesn't end up taking the punishment, she puts herself in May's place. She actually disguises herself as her. So that's very much like Jesus. Of course, Winnie's family is shocked by her actions, and they can't understand why she would do something like that. Like, didn't they raise her right? Didn't they teach her right from wrong? And the only justification she can give is that she loves the Tucks. And that's just like Jesus. The only reason he had for doing everything that he did, for suffering for our sake, is the fact that he loves us. Winnie's parents are ashamed of what she did, and they suffer socially because of it. But the local children come to visit Winnie, wanting to be her friend now. It says that before she seemed almost somehow too clean to be a real friend. This reminds me of how Jesus came to be with us in the incarnation. He didn't stay separate or far off or untouchable. And he wasn't afraid to get his hands dirty, sometimes literally washing the disciples' feet, walking the dusty roads, spending time with people of different backgrounds, different social classes. So it feels like by the end, Winnie has broken free of her family and their idea of respectability, and now she can connect with people on a very real level. The story also makes me think of a couple passages like Ecclesiastes 3, verses 1 through 8. That's the poem about how there is a time for everything. One of my favorite psalms is Psalm 90, verse 12, says, "Teach us to count our days aright, that we may gain wisdom of heart." That's kind of what Winnie learns how to do. She grows wiser by realizing my days are limited, but that's okay, and I can still make the most of the days that I have.
The Tucks sort of start to realize that too, and
Yeah.
in the musical and the song Time, the reprise.
Yes.
Where all of the Tuck family are kind of processing what they're learning from this time with Winnie, and they're realizing interacting with someone whose life is finite has given them a new perspective on their own. Like, we should also be cherishing the time that we've been given, and we should be using it to invest in one another and try to do good with it.
Yeah. I was also looking through the Gospels because Angus says to Winnie that you can't have living without dying. And that made me think of when Jesus is quoted twice in the Gospel of Matthew and once in the Gospel of John. He says something to the effect of, "Whoever wants to save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake will find it, will save it." And I think Joseph Campbell also talked about that paradox that you see come up in mythology, the idea of birth and death being connected, and that death is actually a kind of rebirth. That shouldn't be taken as this dualistic view of death and life are equal or anything like that. Properly understood, death is a part of the brokenness of this world. It's a result of the fall. But it is through death also that Jesus saved us. There is this redemptive quality to it now. But then, like, if we try to preserve our lives here on Earth, then that deprives us of the life that we are meant to have. That about covers everything I had to say. Amelia, did you have any more thoughts you wanted to share?
Yeah, nothing particular that I want to add.
Essentially, Tuck Everlasting is the kind of story that is beautiful in any version. It's a beautiful story for children, for families, and anyone who's wrestled at any point with just the fact of growing up, the fact of our mortality, and finding the beauty in the ordinary. Thank you, Amelia, for joining me for this. And thank you for introducing me to this story in the first place. I think it's safe to say it came into my life at a time when I really needed it, and I think it helped me to prepare for things that have happened since then. So thank you for that.
Thank you for, like you do, giving me so many more reasons to love the stories that I share with you.
Thank you, listeners, for joining us for this conversation. For more content like this, please check out findingfaithinfandoms.org. Lately, I've had articles coming out on CatholicExchange.com, but I'm also releasing longer blog posts for my Patreon supporters. If you enjoy listening to this podcast and reading these articles, please do all the social media things. Like, follow, comment, and share. And if you pray, please pray for us. Thanks, and God bless.